They called her the limping nurse behind her back. At Metropolitan Trauma Center, a place that moved at the speed of panic, Sarah Miller moved with a deliberate, plotting pace that drove the residents insane. Her left knee, a scarred relic from a past she never spoke of, popped audibly with every other step, a metronome of perceived weakness. Dr. Preston Sterling, the new, impossibly handsome chief of surgery and son of a senator, had actually placed a $500 bet with the sycophantic nurses that Sarah wouldn't last the month. He called her Grandma, Geriatric, and, his personal favorite, the Limping Liability. For 20 years, Sarah had walked these halls. Her hair, once a warm brown, was now mostly grey, pulled back in a severe, unfashionable bun that seemed to accentuate the exhaustion etched around her eyes. Her scrubs were always a size too big, hiding a small, tired frame that looked as if a strong wind could knock it over. She was quiet, her voice a raspy whisper, the result, she'd once claimed, of a bad case of bronchitis years ago. She was, in the gleaming high-tech world of metropolitan trauma, an analog relic in a digital age. The younger nurses, like Brittany Moore, would giggle when Dr. Sterling made his jokes. They'd watch him, all 6'2" of chiseled jawline and Harvard confidence, as he smoothed his pristine white coat, an article of clothing he wore like a suit of armor. He would check his Rolex, a flash of gold and steel, and sigh dramatically when Sarah was the nurse assigned to his rounds. He treated the nursing staff like servants, but he was particularly cruel to Sarah. Her quiet dignity, her refusal to be flustered by his barbs, seemed to fuel his contempt. "Sarah, have you checked the expiration dates on the saline bags in Trauma Bay 3? He asked one Tuesday night, his voice booming across the emergency department, ensuring everyone heard. "I checked them 10 minutes ago, Doctor," she replied, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the monitors. "Well, check them again," he snapped, a smirk playing on his lips. "We can't have our patients dying of sepsis because Grandma forgot how to read a label. Your eyes are getting a little old, you know." A few nurses tittered nervously. The charge nurse, Brenda O'Brien, a woman in her 50s with arms like a dock worker and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, shot Sterling a look of pure acid. Brenda had survived pandemics, budget cuts, and 3 hospital strikes. She had 0 patience for incompetence, but even less for bullies. Still, Sterling's father was not just a senator. He was on the hospital's board of benefactors. His family had donated the entire West Wing. He was untouchable. Sarah didn't respond. She just nodded, the movement stiff. Her bad knee popped as she turned. Pop. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet. She walked, slowly, deliberately, toward Trauma Bay 3, the sound of Sterling's smug chuckle following her like a physical blow. Big Mike Cogan, the night security guard who stood a gentle 6'4", watched her go, his brow furrowed in sympathy. He knew everyone's name, everyone's story, but Sarah's was a book he'd never been able to open. He just knew she was kind and that she didn't deserve this. Inside the bay, Sarah pulled the plastic bin of saline bags. Her hands, which sometimes had a faint rhythmic tremor, were steady as she methodically checked each date. The tremor was another source of Sterling's mockery. "Shaky hands sink ships, Sarah," he'd said once during a code. "Maybe you should stick to paperwork." He never noticed that the tremor vanished the moment her hands were on a patient. The knee, the tremor, the quiet voice, they were all just pieces of a puzzle no one had ever bothered to solve. They were scars from a life lived a world away from this sterile, fluorescent-lit battlefield. She finished the demeaning task, her face an unreadable mask. She returned to the nurse's station, her limp more pronounced now that she was tired. She saw Dr. Sterling leaning against the counter, regaling Brittany Moore with a story about his weekend on his father's yacht. Brittany was hanging on his every word, her own charts forgotten. "All checked, Doctor," Sarah said, her voice a low rasp. Sterling didn't even turn to look at her. He just waved a dismissive hand. Good. Now go restock the suture kits. Use the step stool. We wouldn't want you to fall and break a hip. He winked at Brittany, who giggled again, a high, nervous sound. Brenda O'Brien slammed a chart down on the counter. The loud crack made everyone jump. Dr. Sterling, she said, her voice dangerously low. Nurse Miller is a trauma-certified RN with 20 years of experience in this ER. She is not a stock clerk. If you need supplies fetched, ask one of the residents you seem to be so fond of ignoring. Or better yet, get them yourself. It might be the first useful thing you do all night. The air crackled with tension. Sterling's face, usually a mask of smug amusement, flushed a dark, angry red. His jaw tightened. He straightened up to his full height, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate Brenda. It was like a poodle trying to intimidate a grizzly bear. Nurse O'Brien, he said, his voice dripping with venom. I am the chief of surgery. I decide how my staff is utilized. And right now I am utilizing Nurse Miller to ensure basic protocols are followed, something she seems to have trouble with. If you have a problem with my orders, feel free to take it up with Harold Henderson and the board. I'm sure my father would be very interested to hear about your insubordination. Brenda's eyes narrowed. She held his gaze for a long, silent moment. She had a mortgage and 2 kids in college. She hated it, but she knew he held all the cards. She finally gave a curt, angry nod and turned back to her work, her shoulders stiff with fury. The battle was over. Sterling had won. He turned his triumphant smirk back toward Sarah. You see? Chain of command. It's a simple concept. Now, the suture kits. Go on. Sarah looked from Sterling's gloating face to Brenda's defeated back. She saw the fear and complicity in Brittany's eyes. She felt the familiar throb in her knee, a dull ache that was more memory than pain. She thought, not for the first time, that maybe it was time to retire. This place, this new generation of doctors who valued ego over experience, was grinding away what little peace she had managed to find. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and turned to fetch the suture kits, her limp a steady, lonely rhythm in the heart of the bustling ER. Pop, pop, pop. She spent the next hour performing a series of menial tasks assigned by Sterling, each one delivered with a public pronouncement designed for maximum humiliation. She cleaned a minor spill he noticed under a gurney. She was sent to the basement pharmacy to retrieve a common medication the ER had plenty of. She was told to remake a bed in an empty bay because the corner wasn't at a perfect 45-degree angle. Each time, she simply did as she was told, her expression placid, her movements slow and methodical. She was a ghost in oversized scrubs, a relic that everyone wished would just disappear. She was just an old, tired nurse who didn't know her place. She was standing by the nurse's station, finally getting a chance to look at a patient's chart, when Dr. David Park, a first-year resident with earnest eyes and a perpetual look of terror, approached her hesitantly. "Nurse Miller?" he asked quietly, glancing over his shoulder to make sure Dr. Sterling wasn't nearby. "Yes, doctor? I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, about how he treats you. It's not right." Sarah looked at the young man, at the genuine shame and empathy in his face. She offered him a small, rare smile that briefly erased some of the weariness from her features. "It's all right, Dr. Park. You just focus on your patients. That's all that matters." "But he's the chief of surgery," David whispered, as if saying it too loud might get him in trouble. "He's supposed to be the best. But sometimes he seems more interested in being in charge than in healing people." Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Sterling strode back to the station, his presence sucking all the air out of the space. "Dr. Park, are you bothering Nurse Miller?" Don't you have rounds to do? Or are you hoping some of her slowness will rub off on you? David paled and stammered an apology, scurrying away like a frightened mouse. Sterling turned his attention to Sarah. He leaned in close, his voice a low, menacing hiss meant only for her. I see you're trying to sow dissent among my residents. A little mutiny to go with your incompetence. You are on very, very thin ice, old woman. One more mistake, one more misplaced chart, one more questioning look, and I will personally walk you to Human Resources and have your certification reviewed. Do you understand me? Sarah met his cold blue eyes. Her own grey eyes were like chips of flint. For a split second, something flickered in their depths, something hard and ancient and dangerous. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of quiet deference. I understand, Doctor, she rasped. He smiled, satisfied. He had broken her. He had put the old woman in her place. He turned away, ready to find his next victim, his ego swelling with the victory. He was Dr. Preston Sterling. He was in control. He was wrong. Quick pause. It meant a catastrophic event, often with federal or military implications. It meant the rules were about to change. Dr. Sterling, who had been preening by the coffee machine, was the first to react, his voice cutting through the rising panic. My team! Trauma Bay 1, I want full vitals, blood type and cross-match ready before they even hit the door. Park, get me 3 units of O-neg, now. Brittany, I want a full surgical tray, open and ready. Let's go, people, move! He was in his element, barking orders, a general commanding his troops. But there was a brittle edge to his voice, a frantic energy that betrayed a sliver of panic beneath the bravado. This was not a car crash or a gang-related shooting. This was something bigger. Sarah Miller didn't run. She never ran. But she moved with an economy of motion that was deceptively fast. Her limp seemed to vanish, replaced by a fluid, purposeful stride. She bypassed the scrum of nurses grabbing standard supplies and went straight to the advanced airway cart. She pulled out a 14-gauge angiocath, a cricothyrotomy kit, and 2 chest tube trays. She placed them on a separate mobile cart, her hands moving with unshakable precision. The tremor was completely gone. Brenda O'Brien saw her. Sarah, what are you doing? Sterling wants the standard prep. Military transport, mass casualty, Sarah rasped, her eyes scanning the layout of the trauma bay like a tactician surveying a battlefield. Standard prep isn't going to be enough. Brenda hesitated for a second, then nodded. She trusted Sarah's 20 years of gut instinct over Sterling's textbook bluster any day. Do what you need to do. I'll run interference. The 2 minutes felt like 2 seconds. The bay doors burst open with a deafening crash, slammed back against their stoppers by 2 grim-faced military police officers in full tactical gear. They flanked a team of paramedics who were scrambling to keep up with a gurney moving at a dead run. 38-year-old male, multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen. Blood pressure 60 over palp, heart rate 140 and thready. We've pushed 4 units of blood in the field, but we can't keep up, a paramedic screamed, his face spattered with blood. On the gurney was a man who looked like he was carved from granite. Even unconscious and pale, his physique was formidable. Tattoos of military insignias snaked up his powerful arms. He was a warrior, and he was dying. "Get him in Bay 1, Sterling commanded, striding forward with an air of supreme confidence. "Let's see what we've got. I am Dr. Sterling, Chief of Surgery." The paramedics and MPs ignored him. Their focus was entirely on the patient. As they transferred him from their gurney to the trauma bed, a senior paramedic shouted more vitals. "Trachea is deviating to the left, neck veins are distended, no breath sounds on the right side." Sarah, standing by her cart at the edge of the bay, heard those words and her blood ran cold. Tracheal deviation, distended neck veins, absent breath sounds. It was the classic, unmistakable triad. Tension pneumothorax. Air was filling his chest cavity from a punctured lung, compressing his heart and his good lung. It was a ticking time bomb. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before his heart would be squeezed to a stop. "He's bleeding everywhere," Sterling announced, his eyes fixed on the bloody mess of the man's abdomen. "Look at this shrapnel in his neck. We need to control this bleeding now. Brittany, get me lap sponges. Park, more pressure on that chest wound." Sterling was focused on the most visually dramatic injuries, the bright red blood pumping from multiple wounds. He was a surgeon. He saw bleeding, and his instinct was to stop it. But he was missing the invisible killer. He was so fixated on the blood that he failed to look at the man's neck, not at the superficial shrapnel wound, but at the terrifying geography of his windpipe shifting fatally off-center. "Doctor," Sarah's voice cut through the noise. It was no longer a whisper. It was a low, clear command. "Look at his neck, his trachea." Sterling shot her a look of pure, unadulterated fury. "I am busy saving this man's life, Nurse Miller. Get out of my way. Your opinion is neither wanted nor required." The patient's monitor shrieked. His oxygen saturation, already perilously low, plummeted. 70%. 65. His lips, already pale, were turning a dusky, terrifying shade of violet. His eyes, which had been closed, fluttered open for a second, rolling back in his head. That was it. That was the moment. The decision point. Sarah had a choice. Obey the Chief of Surgery, the man who had the power to end her career, the man who had just threatened her license. Stand back and watch this soldier die because of one arrogant doctor's fatal incompetence. Or break every rule in the book. It wasn't a choice. It was an oath. An oath she had taken in a dusty tent in Kandahar, with the sound of mortars falling in the distance. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't shout. She moved. She shoved her cart forward with a loud clang, forcing a startled Dr. Park to jump out of the way. She grabbed the 14-gauge needle from her tray. It was a thick, formidable piece of steel, 3 inches long. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Sterling bellowed, turning on her. "I told you to get out!" He reached out to grab her arm, to physically stop her. Sarah didn't even look at him. As his hand came toward her, she dropped her shoulder and dipped inside his reach, checking his advance with a rigid elbow to his chest. It wasn't a push. It was a tactical block, a move of bone-jarring efficiency. Sterling, all 190 pounds of him, stumbled backward, a look of shocked disbelief on his face. He gasped for air, the block having knocked the wind out of him. In that single, fluid motion, Sarah was at the patient's side. She didn't hesitate. Her left hand slapped onto the soldier's chest, her fingers instantly finding the landmarks she had palpated 1,000 times before in the dark, in the back of shaking helicopters, on bloody floors. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, right over the third rib to avoid the neurovascular bundle underneath. Her right hand brought the needle up. She didn't look at the monitors. She didn't look at the stunned faces of the other staff. She looked at the soldier's face, at the blue tint of his skin. "You assaulted a doctor!" Sterling wheezed, clutching his chest. "You are finished. Security, get her out of here!" Big Mike took a hesitant step forward, his face a mask of confusion. But it was too late. Sarah plunged the needle into the soldier's chest. The sound was audible throughout the now silent room. A soft pop as the needle breached the pleura, followed immediately by a loud, definitive hiss. It was the sound of life. The sound of a massive volume of trapped air escaping the chest cavity, releasing the fatal pressure on the man's heart and lung. The effect was instantaneous and breathtakingly dramatic. The soldier's body, which had been rigid with hypoxia, relaxed. He took a huge, shuddering gasp of air, a ragged, desperate breath that was the most beautiful sound anyone in that room had ever heard. The terrifying violet color of his lips faded, replaced by a wave of pink that spread across his face. On the monitor, the numbers leaped upward. Oxygen saturation climbed from a deadly 58% to 70, then 85, then 94. The frantic, screeching alarm of the EKG slowed to a steady, rhythmic beep. Sarah held the catheter in place for a second, then secured it with a practiced flick of her wrist. She stepped back from the bed, her face impassive. She peeled off her gloves, her hands now showing the faint tremor once more, the adrenaline dump hitting her now that the danger had passed. She looked at Dr. Preston Sterling, whose face had drained of all color. His mouth was hanging open, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a horrified understanding of the mistake he had almost made. He had been focused on the blood, and she had seen the breath. "He's stable for now," Sarah said, her voice a flat, exhausted rasp. "He still needs a chest tube and surgical intervention for the other wounds. Do your job, doctor." The room was deathly silent. Every person in that bay, Brenda, Brittany, Dr. Park, the paramedics, the MPs, was staring at Sarah Miller. They weren't looking at a limping, quiet old nurse anymore. They were looking at something else entirely. They were looking at a savior. And on the bed, the soldier, the Navy SEAL commander, stirred. His eyes, now clear and focused, found Sarah. He was still weak, an oxygen mask now on his face, but the gratitude in his gaze was a physical force. He ignored the chief of surgery, who was standing frozen in shock. He ignored the other nurses and doctors. His eyes were locked on Sarah. Slowly, with immense effort, he lifted his hand. It shook, not from weakness, but from a deeply ingrained reflex. He brought his fingers to his brow in a formal, lingering salute. A salute of absolute, unconditional respect from one warrior to another. Through the plastic of the oxygen mask, he whispered a single, raspy word. A name. Dusty. The room held its breath. The two MPs, who had been standing rigidly by the door, snapped to attention, their faces carved from stone. They weren't looking at the commander. They were looking at Sarah. Sterling's face crumpled in confusion. "What? What did he say? What the hell just happened?" No one answered him. They were all still looking at the limping nurse. The ghost. The woman they called Dusty. Incredible, right? If you want to see more stories where the underdog becomes the hero, subscribe to this channel right now and ring that notification bell. Also, comment below with your best guess about what happens to Dr. Sterling, because trust me, his downfall is going to be spectacular. Let's continue. The calm lasted for exactly 90 seconds. The moment the patient, Commander Jacob Thorne of the Navy SEALs, was stabilized enough to be wheeled toward the operating room, Dr. Preston Sterling's shattered ego began to reassemble itself, piece by jagged piece. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a cold reptilian fury. He had been humiliated. In front of his staff, in front of military personnel, by a nurse, An old, limping nurse. "You," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. "You are finished. You assaulted an attending physician. You performed an unauthorized, reckless procedure on a patient. You violated every protocol in this hospital. You're lucky you didn't kill him." Brenda O'Brien stepped forward, her face a thundercloud. "She saved his life, Preston. You were going to let him die. You missed a tension pneumo. A first-year medical student would have caught that." "I missed nothing," Sterling shrieked, his voice cracking. He was losing control, his carefully constructed facade of cool competence crumbling into dust. "I was prioritizing the exsanguination. The shrapnel wound was the primary threat. She interfered. Her lucky guess doesn't change the fact that she committed assault." He turned to Big Mike, who was still standing near the entrance, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Guard, I want this woman removed from my emergency room and escorted to human resources. She is a danger to patients and staff." Sarah stood quietly, leaning against the cart, the weight of the last few minutes settling on her. She looked at Sterling, at his wild eyes and spittle-flecked lips, and felt not anger, but a deep, profound weariness. She had seen men like him before, men whose pride was more valuable to them than the lives of the soldiers under their command. They never ended well. "I'm sorry, Dr. Sterling," Big Mike said, his voice a low rumble. "But I don't think—" "It's all right, Mike," Sarah said, her voice soft again. She pushed herself off the cart, her knee giving a loud pop. The limp was back, more pronounced than ever. "I'll go." She didn't wait for him to escort her. She turned and began the slow, painful walk out of the trauma bay, the sound of her uneven footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. The other nurses and residents watched her go, a mixture of awe, fear, and shame on their faces. They had let this happen. They had stood by and watched Sterling bully her for weeks, and now she was paying the price for his incompetence. Brittany Moore had tears streaming down her face. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a plush leather chair in a cold, sterile conference room on the hospital's top floor. The mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. Across from her sat Harold Henderson, the hospital administrator, who was sweating profusely and dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Next to him was the head of human resources, a woman with a face so devoid of expression she could have been a mannequin. And next to her, looking smug and victorious in a clean suit, was Dr. Preston Sterling. "Sarah," Harold Henderson began, his voice slick with false sympathy. "We have a very serious situation here. Dr. Sterling has filed a formal complaint. Assault, insubordination, reckless endangerment. These are career-ending accusations." "The patient is stable, isn't he?" Sarah asked, her voice a quiet rasp. Sterling scoffed. "No thanks to you. Your intervention caused a secondary bleed that I had to meticulously repair in the OR. You're lucky I was there to clean up your mess. He's alive in spite of you, not because of you." It was a breathtakingly audacious lie. Sarah just looked at her hands, which were resting in her lap. They were shaking again. "The board has reviewed Dr. Sterling's report," the HR director said, her voice as cold as the room. "And we've reviewed your file. Frankly, given your age and performance issues, we feel that your continued employment presents a significant liability to this hospital." She slid a single piece of paper across the table. "Effective immediately, your employment at Metropolitan Trauma Center is terminated." Sarah looked at the paper. She looked at Henderson's sweaty, averted face. She looked at Sterling's triumphant smirk. She felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. It was over. The fight was gone. She was just a tired old woman with a bad knee. "Fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She stood up, her knee popping. She didn't beg. She didn't argue. She just accepted it. If saving a life costs my career, I'll pay that price. She turned and walked toward the door. Sterling couldn't resist one last parting shot. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Grandma. Try not to trip. Big Mike was waiting for her outside the conference room. He held a small, sad-looking cardboard box. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This isn't right. They made me pack your locker. It's okay, Mike, she said, taking the box. It was ridiculously light. 2 decades of her life reduced to a box that wouldn't even fill the passenger seat of a car. Inside was her cracked, world's okayest nurse coffee mug, a worn pair of trauma shears, a framed photo of her late husband in his army dress uniform, and a small, dying, succulent plant. He walked with her to the main entrance, a silent, hulking shadow of support. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing a miserable grey evening. A cold October drizzle was falling, turning the city into a blur of wet asphalt and hazy lights. You take care of yourself, Sarah, Mike said, his hand on her shoulder. You too, Mike, she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. Watch that blood pressure. The doors slid shut behind her, and she was alone. She stood on the curb, clutching the soggy cardboard box, the cold rain plastering her greying hair to her forehead and soaking through her thin scrubs. Her car was in the shop, an expensive repair she couldn't afford. She'd have to take the bus. She started the slow, painful 6-block walk to the bus stop, her bad knee throbbing in rhythm with the pulsing city lights. The weight of the box seemed to grow heavier with every step. It's over. The thought wasn't angry or sad. It was just a heavy, suffocating fact. Maybe Sterling was right. Maybe she was just an old, incompetent nurse who didn't know her place. He would press charges. There would be a police report. She would lose her certification. She might end up greeting customers at a grocery store. She huddled under the flimsy shelter of the bus stop, shivering, trying to shield the photo of her husband from the rain. In the picture, he was young and handsome and smiling, his uniform crisp, his future bright. He had died in her arms in a dusty field in the Helmand province, his last words a whispered, "Go home, Dusty. Live a quiet life." She had tried. For 20 years she had tried. The streetlights reflected in a puddle at her feet, and in the distorted image she saw herself, a small, soaked, defeated old woman clutching a cardboard box. Her life was over. And then she heard it. A low, deep, thrumming sound rising above the noise of the city traffic. It was a sound she knew in her bones, a sound that was woven into the very fabric of her nightmares and her memories. Thwop, 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 thwop. The ground began to vibrate. The glass of the bus shelter rattled in its frame. The puddles on the street rippled as if in an earthquake. Pedestrians stopped and looked up, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. The thrumming grew into a deafening roar that pressed against her chest. The air pressure changed, making her ears pop. Out of the low-hanging, rain-soaked clouds, they descended. 2 of them. Black Hawk helicopters, sleek and menacing, their rotors tearing the rainy sky apart. They weren't heading for the hospital's rooftop helipad. They were coming down in the middle of the street. Tires screeched as cars slammed on their brakes, causing a multi-car pileup. People screamed and scattered, assuming it was a terrorist attack. The downdraft from the rotors hit the street like a physical blow, inverting umbrellas, sending trash cans rolling, and whipping Sarah's hair across her face. With impossible, terrifying precision, the lead helicopter landed in the middle of the intersection, its landing gear touching down just inches from a stalled taxi. Simultaneously, the street was blocked off at both ends by a convoy of black SUVs and olive-drab military Humvees that had materialized out of nowhere, their tires screeching as they positioned themselves sideways to create a solid blockade. The night exploded in a blinding wash of red, blue, and white flashing lights. Doors on the lead Black Hawk slid open, and a team of soldiers in full combat gear rappelled to the ground. They weren't police. They weren't National Guard. They were operators, moving with the fluid, lethal grace of apex predators. They spread out, creating a perimeter, their rifles scanning the panicked crowd with tactical precision. Then, from the second helicopter, a ramp lowered. A figure emerged, flanked by two men in dark suits. He was an older man, tall and imposing, with a full head of silver hair. He walked down the ramp, not running from the rain, but moving through it as if it wouldn't dare touch him. He leaned on a simple wooden cane, but he didn't use it for support. He wielded it like a scepter. Even from a block away, Sarah could see them, the 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder of his uniform. It was General Thomas Cartwright, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Back inside the hospital, a press conference was hastily being assembled in the main lobby. Harold Henderson, sweating even more than usual, was standing at a podium, Dr. Preston Sterling at his side, looking smug. News crews, drawn by the initial code black, were setting up their cameras. "I want to assure the public," Henderson was saying, his voice shaking slightly, "that the patient, a decorated member of our armed forces, is in stable condition thanks to the swift and decisive actions of our Chief of Surgery, Dr. Preston Sterling." Sterling stepped up to the microphone. "It was a challenging procedure," he said, the picture of calm authority. "There were complications caused by some initial confusion at the scene, but my team and I were able to overcome them. The important thing is that the patient is safe. He is in the best hands at Metropolitan." A reporter shouted a question. "Dr. Sterling, there are rumors that a nurse was fired following the incident. Can you comment?" Sterling's face tightened for a fraction of a second before he replaced it with a look of somber concern. "Unfortunately, yes. We had to let go of an older nurse who, in a state of what appeared to be mental instability, interfered with the procedure and assaulted me. It was a regrettable but necessary decision to ensure patient safety. Our hospital has zero tolerance for such behavior." It was at that exact moment that the main doors of the hospital lobby flew open. General Thomas Cartwright strode in, flanked by Secret Service agents and a phalanx of grim-faced military officers. He was soaking wet, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, scanned the room and landed on the press conference. The lobby fell silent. Cameras turned from Sterling to the 4-star general. Henderson looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "I was just watching your press conference on my aide's tablet," General Cartwright said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute command. It cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "It's time to correct the record." He walked directly up to the podium, ignoring Henderson and Sterling, who both took an involuntary step back. "You just told the nation that the patient is in the best hands. You lied. You told the nation that a nurse was fired for instability. You lied again." Outside, on the rainy street corner, one of the soldiers who had fanned out from the helicopter pointed directly at the bus stop. "Target acquired," he said into his radio. "West side of the street, civilian attire, holding a box." Another soldier broke from the perimeter and sprinted through the stalled traffic, dodging cars with a startling agility. He ran directly up to Sarah, his face urgent. "Ma'am, are you Sarah Miller?" Sarah stared at him, bewildered. "Yes?" "Ma'am, you need to come with us, now." He reached out and took her arm, his grip firm but not rough. "The general is waiting for you." The general?" she stammered, clutching her soggy box. "Drop the box, we're going," the soldier said, pulling her gently toward the waiting helicopter. "No," she said, a flicker of her old stubbornness returning. "The box comes with me." The soldier looked at the pathetic cardboard box, then back at her determined face. He nodded. "All right, the box comes too. Let's move." He half-guided, half-pulled her across the chaotic street, toward the impossible sight of a Black Hawk helicopter idling in the middle of a major metropolitan intersection. Inside the hospital lobby, General Cartwright turned to face a pale and trembling Dr. Sterling. "I am General Thomas Cartwright. The man you almost killed is Commander Jacob Thorne. He's not just a soldier. He's my godson." Sterling's face went from pale to ghostly white. "When my godson was stabilized enough to speak," the general continued, his voice dangerously soft, "he told us what happened. He told us that a doctor, a chief of surgery no less, was so arrogant and incompetent that he was going to let him die from a tension pneumothorax, a textbook injury that any first-year combat medic in a muddy ditch in Afghanistan would have spotted in 10 seconds. He paused, letting the words hang in the silent, camera-filled room. He also told us that a nurse saved his life. A nurse who you, doctor, tried to stop. A nurse who, according to the security footage I've already reviewed, you physically tried to block. And when she saved him anyway, you had her fired." The general turned to one of his aides, a stern-faced lieutenant colonel holding a black folder with the Department of Defense seal on it. "Colonel, do you have the file?" The aide stepped forward. "I do, General." General Cartwright took the folder and opened it. He didn't look at it. He knew what it said. He looked directly at Sterling, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "Do you know who Sarah Miller is, Doctor?" Sterling just shook his head, speechless. The general began to read, his voice ringing through the lobby. "Retired Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Dusty Miller, United States Army Medical Corps, 24 years of service, 5 tours in Iraq, 4 in Afghanistan. Lead trauma specialist attached to the Joint Special Operations Command for the last 10 years of her service." A collective gasp went through the room. Brenda O'Brien, who had come to the lobby to see what the commotion was, put her hand to her mouth. Brittany Moore started to openly weep. "Recipient of the Bronze Star with Valor," the general continued, his voice rising with each word. "The Defense Superior Service Medal, the Army Commendation Medal, and the Distinguished Service Cross, our nation's second highest award for valor, awarded for her actions during Operation Enduring Freedom, where she performed a field cricothyrotomy on a wounded ranger while under direct enemy fire, saving his life." He looked up from the file, his gaze like a physical weight. "She is legendary in the special operations community. They call her Dusty because she spent more time on medevac helicopters than she did in a hospital. She has saved more lives in burning Humvees and dusty villages than you have in your pristine multi-million-dollar operating rooms, Doctor." The tremor in her hands? That's nerve damage from holding direct pressure on a soldier's severed femoral artery for 6 straight hours in the back of a crashing Black Hawk. The limp you find so amusing? That's from a shattered knee she got from shielding a wounded Marine from a mortar blast in Kandahar. She refused a medical evacuation until every one of her patients was stable. The general slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This woman is not a liability. She is a national hero. And you fired her. You humiliated her. You called her grandma." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You are not fit to wipe the mud from her boots." He turned to the terrified Harold Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, as of this moment, your hospital is under federal investigation for malpractice, insurance fraud, and obstruction of a military operation. All federal funding is frozen. Your family's connections will not help you this time, Dr. Sterling. Your father, the senator, is currently on the phone with the Secretary of Defense, explaining how his son, the chief of surgery, almost murdered my godson out of sheer, breathtaking arrogance." Sterling crumpled. It wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow, horrifying deflation, as if his bones had turned to liquid. The veneer of the handsome, arrogant prince shattered completely, revealing the terrified, incompetent little boy underneath. He stammered, his face slick with sweat. It was a mistake. I didn't know. No, the general said, his voice like ice. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose your ego over a patient's life. That is a choice you will have to live with for the rest of your very short career. He turned to Henderson again. I have one more order for you. You will find Lieutenant Colonel Miller. You will reinstate her immediately. You will give her whatever position, whatever salary she asks for. And then you will give her the authority to overhaul every single protocol in this ER to ensure this never, ever happens again. Is that clear? Henderson, his face the color of ash, could only nod mutely. Just then, the lobby doors opened again. The young soldier from outside entered, followed by Sarah Miller. She was still soaking wet, still clutching her soggy cardboard box. She looked small and lost in the grand lobby, blinking in the bright lights of the news cameras. General Cartwright's entire demeanor changed. The hard, angry commander vanished, replaced by a man filled with warmth and profound respect. He walked over to her, his cane tapping on the marble floor. You're a hard woman to track down, Dusty, he said, his voice gentle. Sarah looked up at the 4-star general, a man she had served under but hadn't seen in years. A small, tired smile touched her lips. You look like hell, Tom. So do you, he chuckled. He gestured toward the stunned crowd. Sorry to make a scene, but Commander Thorne was very specific. He didn't want the doctor. He wanted the nurse. He wanted Dusty. Sarah looked past the general at the wreckage of Dr. Sterling's career. He was standing there, a hollowed-out man, his expensive suit looking like a cheap costume. Their eyes met for a second. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a quiet, sad finality. Brenda O'Brien pushed through the crowd and wrapped Sarah in a fierce hug. I knew it, she whispered. I always knew there was more to you. Big Mike Cogan stepped forward. He walked past the generals and the federal agents, past the cameras and the reporters. He walked directly to Dr. Preston Sterling. In his hands, he held a new, empty cardboard box. He held it out to the disgraced surgeon. His voice was low and steady, but it carried across the silent lobby. I believe you know the way out, Dr. Sterling. He paused, letting the words sink in. Here's a box for your things. It's a bit small, but I have a feeling you'll manage. Sterling stared at the box as if it were a venomous snake. Then, under the cold, unforgiving gaze of everyone in the room, he took it. His hands were shaking. As the same guard who had escorted Sarah with sympathy now escorted Sterling with grim satisfaction, Sarah watched from a distance. She said nothing. She didn't need to. As he passed, Big Mike paused and leaned in, whispering something only Sterling could hear. Should have respected the nurses, Doc. Sterling stumbled out into the pouring rain, without an umbrella, without a car waiting, without a single friend. The cameras followed him, their flashes like lightning strikes, illuminating his final, pathetic walk of shame. His box grew soggy in his hands, its contents spilling onto the wet pavement. 1 year later, the sun shone brightly on the newly dedicated Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Dusty Miller Center for Trauma and Emergency Medicine. The wing of the hospital that Sterling's family had funded had been renamed. In the front row of the dedication ceremony sat General Thomas Cartwright, a proud smile on his face. Beside him was Commander Jacob Thorne, looking healthy and strong, a faint scar on his neck the only reminder of that night. He wore it like a badge of honor. In the crowd, the hospital staff stood tall, their posture different. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. A young, eager nurse, whom Sarah was now personally mentoring, watched her with eyes full of admiration. Sarah stood at the podium, no longer in oversized scrubs, but in a simple professional dress. Her hair was still in a bun, but it was softer now. She still had her limp, but she no longer tried to hide it. She looked out at the crowd, at Brenda O'Brien, now the Director of Nursing, at a humbled and respectful Dr. David Park, now a senior resident, and at Big Mike Cogan, who gave her a thumbs up from the back. "They say authority is granted by a title on a door," she began, her voice no longer a rasp but clear and strong. "But I learned a long time ago that true authority is earned. It's earned in the trust of your patients. It's earned by the respect of your colleagues. This center isn't named after me because I was a lieutenant colonel. It's named after a nurse. Because this name is a promise. It's a promise that in this hospital, competence will always matter more than credentials. It's a promise that every voice, from the chief of surgery to the newest nursing student, will be heard." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the people she had fought for. "And it is a promise that if you ever have to choose between breaking a rule and saving a life, you save the life. Every single time. I'll have your back." A thunderous applause erupted, not just from the dignitaries, but from the nurses, the paramedics, the security guards, the janitors, the people who did the actual work. Sarah Miller, the limping nurse, the ghost medic, had finally come home. And in doing so, she had given them all a home too. A place where they were seen, respected, and empowered. A place where the patient always came first. And that is how Sarah Miller went from fired and humiliated to a national hero in less than 24 hours. The story of Sarah Miller is a reminder that true heroism often goes unnoticed until the moment it becomes absolutely necessary. In a world obsessed with titles, status, and bureaucracy, it's easy to forget that the most important people in the room are often the ones doing the actual work. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible stories of justice. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Never judge a book by its cover, and never, ever underestimate a nurse. Comment below with your thoughts on Dr. Sterling's fate. Thanks for watching.